Thank you so much, everyone. Let's get to it now. There have been some eyebrows raised over the recent appointments made by President Muhammadu Buhari. A former Minister of Aviation, Mr. Osita Chidoka, has called on the Nigerian Senate to reject the nomination of a candidate from northern states of Kwara and Taraba as Chairman and Secretary of the Federal Character Commission, the FCC. Mr. Chidoka said the nomination violated Section 4 of the subsidiary legislation, which states that the distribution of positions shall be across the zones. He said that it had always been the tradition that chairman and secretary are from the north and south, respectively. For the same reason, he said past governments, including Obasanjo and Jonathan, had appointed northerners and chairmen and southerners as secretaries. He's alleging that the seats of national discord has been systematically sold over the past 5 years and should be halted. Let's hear his views now. Mr. Osita Chidoka joins us on the program. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Let's take a look at what you are talking about. You have asked the Senate not to consider the nomination of the president. Are you saying that what the president, the nomination is illegal or what?
Yes, clearly from the Constitution, it was very made clear in our Constitution that, and that is the Chapter 2, Section 14.3, expressly mandates the composition of the government of the Federation or any of its agencies, and in the conduct of its affairs shall be carried out in such a manner that needs to reflect the federal character of Nigeria and the need to promote national unity. So the Federal Character Commission is a product of a constitutional requirement for us to consistently reflect our federal character and also to promote national unity. Now, that constitutional provision, which is in the Chapter 2 of our Constitution, also goes ahead to say that it is the duty, it shall be the duty, it didn't say may, it shall be the duty and responsibility of all organs of government and of all authorities and persons exercising legislative, executive or judicial powers to conform, to observe and to apply the provisions of this chapter of the Constitution. And based on that, the Federal Character Commission was founded. And the Federal Character Commission, in its own subsidiary legislation, says in Section 4 that whenever there is a position available, it should be divided across the states. And if for any reason it's not enough to go around the states, then we shall do it zonally. And if it happens that it's only 2 positions that are available, it shall be divided between the north and the southern zones. Now, so this is one area where there is a specific requirement for you to reflect federal character. And the fact that we have a Federal Character Commission means that Nigeria has understood ethnicity and its problems as a challenge in our quest for nation building. And I think the president and the government, this current government, has shown very little sensitivity to the issue of nation building and to the issue of reflecting federal character. But in this particular case, this is a violation of the precise provisions of the Federal Character subsidiary regulations, laws. And I asked the Senate not to consider it. It is high time we begin to push back at what has gone all these years. It has taken Nigeria so many years to make this progress, to find out the 6-zonal structure, to find a way of reflecting our diversity, which is supposed to promote our unity. Ultimately, the country does not need to have an affirmative action. When we get to the point when we have built a nation, we can then do away with the federal character rule. But so long as it is in our laws, so long as it is the requirement of our Constitution, I think that every authority, whether legislative, executive, must reflect the federal character in Nigeria. It is mandatory.
We're going to look at the meat of what you have raised and what you are asking the Senate to do or not to do. But there is something that is fundamental in the last the second to the last paragraph of your submission on this matter. And you said, quoting you now, you said, the seeds of national discord has been systematically sold over the past 5 years and should be halted. Are you saying that this government of President Muhammadu Buhari over the last 5 years ignored the issue of national unity and federal character in its appointment?
Totally. This government has totally ignored the federal character rule in its appointments. It has totally ignored it. I mean, we cannot have a situation where you have all the security agencies of the country, all the paramilitary agencies of the country being reflected from one section of the country, from the northern part of the country. That's not correct. That's not right. And at the same time, we are respecting the rules of educationally disadvantaged state in admissions. We are reflecting the rules of lowering the scores for people in recruitment. How come that we are not reflecting that issue at the appointment of the top echelon of the government? We cannot have a system where the government, and I say this with all due sense of responsibility as a former senior government official, but I think that the president does himself incalculable harm to wake up every morning from the protocol officer he sees, to the ADC he sees, to the chief of, to his chief detail, to his chief of staff, to his secretary to government, and they are all from one part of the country. He does himself incalculable
Mr. Chidoka, apologies. Yeah, sorry, apologies. Quickly. All right, so we're going to break in another 40 seconds. Before we go on that break, some people who are watching now who are critical of what you're saying will say, you have been in government before, especially in the government of former President Goodluck Jonathan, that if you make a comparative analysis of the appointments in that government and this government, would you say that the government where you served is better off in terms of reflection of federal character than this government?
Definitely. I'm far better than this government. And I thought that the government of President Obasanjo set a benchmark. Yaradua came, he wasn't as he was in Obasanjo's government. He wasn't as he was in Jonathan's government. Did not even go as far as Obasanjo. But what we have today is a new law. This is totally a new law. President Jonathan has a chief detail that was from the north. He's still working with him. So invariably, what we say to the country, what the president is saying to the country, I cannot trust any other part of the country to handle my own security. I cannot trust any part of the country to stay close to me. That is why we say that in the appointments of the government should reflect our federal character, just so that the president will get a rounded view of what is happening across the country. It's even important for him to always get that view. But from what I can see now, and focusing on this Federal Character Commission, I think it is high time we begin to question this appointment, especially where the law specifically makes provisions for it.
All right. Former Aviation Minister, please stay with us. We'll take a break. But when we come back, we obviously will get other views as against what Mr. Osita Chidoka, the former Aviation Minister, has said tonight, whether or not they are right or wrong. More analysis after this break, everyone. Join us again. Thank you so much, everyone, for staying with us on the program tonight. We're looking at President Muhammadu Buhari's appointment. There is the allegation that they've been lopsided. In fact, the former Minister of Aviation said that we're experiencing a new low in the spread of appointment and the recognition of national unity in some of this. The former Minister of Aviation, of course, is of the PDP member of the PDP. Let's go to our Abuja studio and hear from a lawyer and a public affairs analyst, Mr. Daniel Bwala, joins us on these issues of appointment and federal character. Thank you so much, Mr. Bwala, for joining us tonight. You heard some of the things that the former aviation minister said, especially as relating to the Federal Character Commission appointment. First and foremost, react quickly, if you may, on what he said. He said, we have experienced a new low in the country as regarding a national spread in appointments. Is that true?
Well, thank you for having me. I must really commend Mr. Chidoka for making a very good attempt of analyzing the law, being that he is an undergraduate student of law. However, his premise and conclusion is wrong, especially if you look at it and rank it pari passu the authorities he has cited. Nigeria is delineated into zones and not region, where you have the north and the south. That's why projects are executed from that perspective. That's why when there is a representation in terms of interest, it is also considered from that perspective. I'm sure if you tell Mr. Chidoka he's a Yoruba man, he will disagree with you. So we are not running a pre-independent law. That's why if you look at that constitution that he cited, and I would like to speak to it, it says that the composition of the government of the federation shall be run in such a way that it will not reflect a people of a particular ethnic group or particular state. The last time I checked, Taraba is in the northeast, Kwara is in the north central. If you look at section 4 of the subsidiary legislation that he referred to, you will see reference to the word zones there and not region. As long as there is a representation of the Nigerian people in the commissioner's position, when it comes to the chairmanship and that of the secretary, the constitutional provision which must be complied and applied strictly is that you must not make the chairman and secretary from, let's say, the northeast, both of them, or the north central, both of them, or in fact in any part of the country, or northeastern states. But if it is from a zone that is different from each other, you have complied with the requirement of law. Now, there are two things there, Mr. Sheun. He mentioned tradition, and then he mentioned the law and tried to lump them. That is not how you learn the law as a student, because we know for a fact that tradition, unless it has a legal backing, it does not have the force of law. That is why after you have done traditional marriage, you still require to do court wedding before you can begin to invoke the powers of the law. No matter how many times tradition and conventions are being observed and obeyed, it does not establish the certainty of law unless you can show that there is a legislation that has now formalized it or that it is now done. So the fact that President Jonathan and President Obasanjo has done it in the past does not make it a law. What makes it a law is what we are citing here, the constitutional provision, and then comparing that position with the subsidiary legislation. Can Mr. Chidoka show to me, from these two authorities he has cited, that two geopolitical zones amount to the same as interpreted or as projected by the legislation that he has produced? I would say no. But you see, he can look at it from the political perspective. And if you look at it from the political perspective, what comes into place is not just legal compliance, but what we call in politics as lobbying. So, for example, he can talk to his PDP people to speak to APC senators in the National Assembly because he's calling on them to reject the appointment or the nomination. So he can lobby with the people and engage in conversation so that people from APC might reason with him to then take a representation to the president and say, we are looking at it from the political standpoint, and it is our honest recommendation that you should take either the chairman or secretary to the other part of the geopolitical zones that is very far from the pre-independent regional point of view. But if we talk of adhering to the strict provision of the law, there is no violation of the law because Kwara and Taraba are not from the same geopolitical zones, and the people from Kwara and Taraba are not of the same ethnic group, and because of that, there is actually no non-compliance to the provisions of the law.
Before I come back to you with my question, let's tell you the breaking news here, right here on Channels Television. An 8-story building under construction along Yaradua Drive in Owerri, Imo State capital, has collapsed, leaving several people trapped. Rescue operation ongoing. As breaking news that we're following from you from Imo State is that an 8-story building under construction along Yaradua Drive in Owerri, Imo State capital, has collapsed, leaving several people trapped. A rescue operation ongoing. Please stay with us. We'll give you updates on that breaking news. Let me come back to you, Mr. Bwala, on that thought. Are you saying that fundamentally that the law does not specify whether or not it should be north or south in the spread of how the sitting would be in an agency such as the Federal Character Commission or the RMFSCA?
Yes, look at the Constitution. And I wish you can read it or you can put it on the screen. You will see that it says the composition of the government of the Federation or its agency shall reflect the principles of federal character and shall avoid a situation where people from a state or from an ethnic background dominating area of government. So in other words, strict application of that law is that the Federal Character Commission nomination should be that the chairman, because already at the commissioner level you have covered the country. So at the chairman and the secretary level, they must not both of them be from the same geopolitical zones. Or even if they come from two different geopolitical zones, they must not belong to the same ethnic background. But as long as that is not followed, that is to say, that the appointment comes from different geopolitical zones, then there is a compliance with the provision of the law. And he cannot, in the circumstance, call on the National Assembly to say what the president has done is unlawful. And I try to resist the temptation of lumping this fact in issue that we're discussing with other appointments that the president has done, which can steer, for example, emotional discourse or social discourse. So if you don't understand the slight difference between our discussion for today, based on Federal Character Commission and nomination, as well as the Constitution with all our appointment, you will think that what is here also applies to other aspects of appointment or nomination of the president. But as far as this particular nomination is concerned, there is strict compliance with the provision of the law, and there is no violation of the constitutional provision.
Let's get a view of reaction from Mr. Osita Chidoka. How would you react to Mr. Bwala's submission on this?
Well, I thank him for his submission, but of course, it's always the fact to misrepresent issues. So the first misrepresentation is that when I talk of tradition, I talked of tradition in relationship to the fact that chairmen of the Federal Character Commission have always come from the north. The chairmanship. And I said he's also, Jonathan and Obasanjo did the same thing. They appointed chairmen from the north. So more or less, we almost established a tradition of having northerners as chairmen. So when the president appointed a secretary from the north, many of us assumed he was going to flip the balance now and bring in a southerner as chairman. That's to the extent I talked about tradition. But when you talk about the law, Section 14.3 of the Constitution, and I read it clearly, the composition of the government of the Federation or any of its agencies and the conduct of its affairs shall be carried out in such a manner as to reflect the federal character of Nigeria and the need to promote national unity, and also to command national loyalty, thereby ensuring that there shall be no predominance of persons from a few states or from a few ethnic or other sectional groups in that government or in any of its agencies. So it talks about ethnic groups, it talks about states, it talks about zone. But when you go to the subsidiary legislation of the Federal Character Commission, it talks about reflecting all the Section 4 says all the states of the Federation. If the position is not enough to go for 36, then you do it by the zonal structure. If there were about 4 positions now, you will say you take one from the northwest and northeast, then you take from southeast and southwest. But if the position is 2, then you will take from the north and from the south.
Mr. Chidoka, we're obviously out of time. We need to go now. But it will be fair to allow Mr. Bwala just in a sentence to make a response. We are out of time, but Mr. Bwala, a sentence and we close.
So I'm happy that he read by himself the provision of the Constitution to support my argument and use his own words to support my argument. But when he was reading Section 4 of the subsidiary legislation, he omitted to mention the word zonal there. That is to say, it is considered by way of zoning. Zonal, geopolitical zones are not regional in terms of the north and the south. But it's a good try as a student of law. And I'm really wishing him well to graduate, come to law school, finish, and become a lawyer. Then we can argue as professionals.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bwala, for your submission, and also from Mr. But that's how we leave it tonight. Everyone, thanks so much for watching. I'm Sean Wakimale. Bye-bye.